Trisha Hersey was bone tired between studying in her seminary program at Emory University, working, having an internship, and raising her young son. She could not catch a moment's rest. I read these lines in a New York Times article several years ago about the author Trisha Hersey, whose newest book was called Rest as Resistance, and I felt every bit of that tiredness. Have you felt that? Having sold her car to afford graduate school, commuting on 3 buses and a train was just another time suck. Any free moments she had were devoted to study, but in her exhaustion, she often had to read and reread things just to kind of absorb them. Her grades suffered, her health flagged, something had to give. Her father, Willie, who worked for Union Pacific Railroad while helping pastor a church, while devoting time to his community, rarely took a moment to himself, and she was certain it was overwork that killed him at 55. I'm not even going to ask you if you've been this tired, because I know you have. We all have. Exhaustion is ubiquitous in our culture. When you ask someone, how are you? Not like, oh, I'm fine, but like, how are you really? The answer you will most likely get is tired, exhausted. There's tired, and then there's bone tired. Weight of the world in your muscles and bones feeling. Maybe you first felt that kind of tired as a kid at the end of a semester or the end of camp or the end of your first job when your body just collapses. Almost every semester of college and grad school, I would come home and sleep for 3 or 4 days sick because I had just pushed and pushed and pushed until I couldn't anymore. When my son was a newborn, I remember not even knowing how I was functioning. I was so tired. As a single mom through foster care and adoption, the foster care agency had given me this app that I was supposed to use to track his sleeping and his eating and those kinds of things. And the app also gave you helpful tips for parenting. And one night, in the middle of the night, I received this helpful tip for parenting while I was up with him that said, why don't you go to sleep and let your partner stay up with the child tonight? I just about yelled at the app, are you going to stay up with the kid? I don't know who you think's coming. I was exhausted. The best gift anyone gave me in those times was to come over so I could nap. When you've been there, in grief, in parenting, in stress, in overwork, in caregiving, in that bone-tired, everything hurts and seems impossible self, that's where Elijah was today in our scripture. Exhausted, bone-tired. Elijah is a prophet. You probably know this. In a time of a severe drought and famine in Samaria, Ahab and his wife Jezebel are in power at this time, and they're not known for being the kindest leaders. They severely abuse their power. There's that story of them wanting Naboth's family vineyard, and when he says, I'm not going to give it to you for any price, it's my family's, it's been here for generations, he has him killed. There's the story of how he killed all the prophets of God, everyone but Elijah, basically. When our story picks up, Elijah has just confronted Ahab. He has put him up in this movie-like victory dramatic challenge. Elijah said, look, let's see who's really in charge here. My God, or Baal, who you worship, I have an idea. You bring up 450 of your prophets of Baal to Mount Carmel. We'll invite all the people to come watch. Bring a bull, we'll bring 2. We're going to cook them. I'll cut mine up and get it ready. You'll cut yours up and get ready. We'll put them out, but don't bring anything to start the fire. You can call to Baal and see if he starts the fire. I'll call to God, see if God starts the fire. We'll just see what happens. So they all come, 450 of Baal's prophets, and, Elijah, the only one still standing of God's prophets, and all the people are there, and Elijah explains what's going to happen. And the prophets of Baal try day and night, praying, crying out, dancing, screaming, begging for fire. Nothing happens. Elijah kind of mocks them. Then Elijah comes up. God, everyone, he says, come a little closer. Come a little closer. I want you to hear this. he whispers it. God, can you just show these people that you're really in charge? Can you start a fire? And a fire comes and explodes and grows. And it says the people believed in the Lord. And so Elijah takes all of Baal's prophets and all of the people there, and they have them killed. And then the drought of 3 years ends. It starts raining. It pours. Elijah's having a victory moment, feeling great about himself. In the movie, this is where it would end, right? This is actually just where our scripture picks up. Jezebel has found out that all of her prophets of Baal have been murdered by Elijah and the crowd, and she threatens his life. So may the gods do to me and more also, she says, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by time tomorrow. Now, having seen Elijah so far in the story, you would probably assume that our hero, who is on top right now, would laugh at her, challenge her right back, and put an end to her reign of terror. But that's not what happens. He runs away instead. He's afraid. He's exhausted. I wonder if maybe he's feeling some of the grief and the trauma of what has just happened. Guilt for being a part of the murder of so many people. All he wants to do is get away and make it stop. So he flees into the wilderness until his body cannot take one more step. And he sees this single tree in the midst of the hot desert. And he sits down under it and he asks God if he could just die right there. Have you ever felt that bone tired? Exhaustion, grief, overwhelming depression and anxiety, where you just want to give up, for it all to stop for just a moment. I think we're brave enough to admit it. Maybe all of us have been close to there at some point. Elijah has gone from triumph to exhaustion, from confidence and bravado to self-doubt and fear in just a day. In a statement he said just yesterday, bragging, I'm the only prophet left of God, now is spoken again in fear. I'm the only prophet left, God. From a highest high to a lowest low. Have you ever noticed that feeling in yourself after some great high, some big accomplishment, some huge success? When you think you should be feeling your very best, you finally get a moment to sit down, and all those feelings you've been pushing away in your busyness, all of that anxiety and fear, it starts to come on, and suddenly you find yourself uncharacteristically angry or in tears, full of self-doubt. This is where Elijah was. We do it in our culture all the times. We don't let ourselves feel our feelings. We get so busy. We just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And we don't see what it's doing to us. I heard someone on a podcast with Jen Hatmaker recently say, we can all handle feeling mad or scared or sad. What we can't handle is feeling these things and pretending like we're not. Tricia Hersey, who that New York Times article was about, went on to start the NAP ministry, where she talks about how the grind culture is killing us. The working nonstop is not of God. When she started resting, even if that rest came at the expense of time she would use to study, she found herself feeling better. Her mind cleared. Her grades improved. She committed to it, and in the process pushed back on the process that she as a Black woman saw as a legacy of forced labor and exhaustion her ancestors had endured. She understood that rest and Sabbath is not only a spiritual practice, it's not only a nice luxury, it's a spiritual necessity. It is a commandment from God. It's for all of us, even those of us who are too busy to rest. This is where Elijah finds himself. You know he had to have been afraid. He and his people have been hungry and tired. Everyone else in his position as a prophet had been killed. He had put it all on his line, his life consistently being threatened, but he just kept going, trying to save God's people, trying to do what he was called to do, trying to be brave, and the pressure overwhelmed him. As someone in a helping profession, I hear often warnings about the suicide rate of those in caregiving professions, pastors, nurses, our military, counselors, so many who try to do it all for everyone else without stop until it breaks them. This is where Elijah is when he prays for an end, for a break, and he falls asleep under that tree. He needed Sabbath rest. Not just rest from labor, but rest with God. Rest he didn't have to earn. Rest that was his God-given right. He is in this deep sleep when, our story says, an angel, a messenger of God, gently touches him. Get up and eat. And warm food was there at his head, a jar of water sitting beside him. He eats, drinks, and falls right back asleep. I love this response from God. God does not wake Elijah up, shaming him for falling asleep when there is so much work to be done and so many people who are hurting. God doesn't try to do what Brene Brown says in this video we show our Be the Neighbor groups. She talked about empathy, and she calls it silver lining it. God doesn't try to silver line it for Elijah. Doesn't say, well, at least you got away from Jezebel. At least there was a nice tree to rest under. It's not bad. At least it's going to get better from here. God doesn't even get angry at Elijah. Why are you tired, mad at me? Didn't I just show up for you in that fire in front of all those people? Don't I just keep saving your life? What on earth do you have to complain about? God doesn't even make him talk about his feelings or why he's depressed. God just shows up with a snack and says, here, go back to sleep. Doesn't that sound heavenly? It's true for kids, right? If you've ever had kids, you know a nap and a snack can fix almost anything. It's true for Elijah. It's true for us. My 4-year-old has made a safe place in our house for our puppy. So whenever our puppy is running around like a wild dog, Spencer, my son, takes Brooks, our puppy, over to this little spot in his room he's made where he's laid out some blankets for him. He's taped a picture of his dog family that we adopted him from on the wall so he can see his mom. And then he has a little bucket of snacks there. Spencer says, all right, Brooks, I think you need a snack and some rest. And look, here's your family. You're loved. And it works. It's nuts. But it's what we all need, right? Just a snack. Some rest, a reminder that we're loved. Before Elijah could start to heal, to continue on to that next thing he was called to do, God knew that he needed rest, a snack, nourishment, to know he wasn't alone. Maybe you've been there at your rock bottom of grief or stress or life, and a friend just shows up with food. Maybe they just take something off your to-do list without even asking you, and they let you rest. Who has God sent to you in your rock bottom moments as angels to show you you're not alone? My friends are the very best when they can see I'm going downwards of scooping me up and taking me to a patio with chips and salsa, and suddenly life seems manageable again. When we hit the bottom, we need other people to be there for us, to show up. We need God to show up for us, because we have to sit there for a while. We can't rush the healing. We can't force ourselves to rise up, to feel better fast, to get to the after picture on social media. We have to sit in it for a while. That's when the healing starts. And the angel knows this. So she responds to Elijah with presence, not trying to take away the pain, not telling Elijah to pull it together, just sitting with gentle love and a snack. The ministry of accompaniment or presence is one of the most powerful gifts people can give to us and one of the most powerful ministries we can offer to others. My friend Toulouse Schuyler lived a ministry of accompaniment. Our friend Vicki, who is our teacher at Vanderbilt, had taught her and I that accompaniment means, if you break the word apart and get down to its roots, coming with bread. I love that idea. Toulouse founded the Nashville Food Project, an organization that brings people together to grow, cook, and share nourishing food, to cultivate community, to alleviate hunger. She knew that when people's lives were falling apart, if you show up with fresh baked bread and presence, healing could be found almost anywhere. 2 years ago, when Toulouse was diagnosed with glioblastoma, Vicki started each week to bring fresh baked bread to her house. It nourished her and her kids and her husband. It reminded them they weren't alone. They weren't forgotten, that someone cared. When Talou died last year, she had requested that at her funeral, it be filled the church, all inside the sanctuary with tables, with homemade bread, so that everyone could take some on their way home. Those who were grieving could find nourishment, could know they weren't alone, could taste and see that God was with them. It was the most gentle and powerful act of love, and it's what God does. It's what God did for Elijah. It's what God does throughout the Bible. It's why stories of manna in the wilderness and 5 loaves and 2 breads feeding multitudes stick with us. It's why one of the greatest gifts we receive each week is right here at this table, right? Bread, a place to rest, nourishment, a reminder that we are not alone and never will be, that God's love will catch us and find us always, even in death. It is the best ministry we can provide for anyone. Accompaniment, showing up with bread and letting them rest. After Elijah sleeps for a while, a second time the angel wakes him up. And this time he's truly rested. It's only then he starts to find healing and joy. He starts to follow God. The angel says, "Get up and eat, or this journey is going to be too much for you." She reminds him he can't do it alone. This journey is too much on our own. Life is hard, she says to him. Maybe God says to us. But you don't have to do it hungry. You don't have to do it tired. You don't have to do it alone. No, God will be with you. God will nourish you. God will provide you with rest. You can choose to take it or not, but it's there for you. Always, always waiting. How often has this gift of rest and nourishment been offered to us and we don't take it out of our own stubbornness that we can just power through this on our own? But Sabbath rest reminds us that when we rest, God will still be God. God will take care of things. Surprisingly, I know this is surprising for me a lot, the world will just continue and work if you take a day off. Things will continue well because God is God and we are not, and that is good. After those 40 days, Elijah finds himself in a cave, and God shows up again. Not in the fire like God had done at Mount Carmel, not in earth or wind, earthquakes or wind, or anything mighty or movie. Just quiet, just restful. The still, small voice of God. And he can hear it now that he's rested. Elijah doesn't rest forever. When he's rested, when he's nourished, when God has woken him up and he's heard God's call again, he goes out to provide places of rest and nourishment and peace for all of God's people who are hurting. After the time of quiet, he's now better ready to serve God and God's people. He's not burnt out anymore in that place where he couldn't have helped anyone, and if he had, it would have done damage. He was rested now. He needed that rest to be who God was calling him to be. It's what God calls us to as well, to rest, and then to rise, ready to share those same gifts of love, rest, nourishment, and peace that have been shared with us with others. On our Be the Neighbor trips on Friday is what we call our Explore the City Day. I used to call it our Fun Day, but then I decided the whole thing was fun, so I changed the name. But on our Explore the City Day, before they go out, we talk about Sabbath. And I tell this story, you may have heard it, Kyler. I tell this story about this elementary school in Chicago. And at this school, there had been a lot of violence around their school, and so they hadn't, for the last 2 years, this was pre-COVID, for the last 2 years, they hadn't let kids out into the recess area outside to play. They'd had to play inside. And so one day, the 5th and 6th graders in the school, the oldest kids in the school, went to the principal and said, "We have an idea. We don't think it's fair that our little brothers and sisters have not gotten to play outside, and so we've come up with a plan. We, the 5th and 6th graders, we're going to stand around the fence at the school. We'll stand around, make sure our brothers and sisters are safe so they can play. Can we do that? The principal said, that's a great idea, but no, you can't do it. You're going to go play too, and me and the teachers, we'll all stand around the fence and we'll watch so you can play. And then the story got out again, and the community leaders and the pastors and some of the business leaders and police said, great idea, but you're not going to stand at the fence. We are going to stand around the fence so you can play with your kids. That's what we're called to do. Once we've found rest, once we've found play, once we've found joy, our job is to be the fence so that our neighbors can also have a safe place to rest, to find joy, to play for a while. And we just keep doing it for each other so that all of us can live into that Sabbath loving rest of God. You, your loved ones, our neighbors, our country, our world, we need quiet right now. We need rest. We need a snack. We need to know that we are not alone. So go home today from our worship and rest, just like your pastor is resting in the mountains as we speak. Eat good food. And then listen for that still small voice of God that you can hear only in the quiet. And then wake up, ready to be the angel for someone else, showing up with bread so everyone may know the peaceful, life-changing presence and love of God that sometimes shows up best in rest and a snack. Amen.